We're going to now show 40 minutes as the Church Committee investigates the Huston Plan, and this was televised on September 23, 1975 by the Public Broadcasting Service, PBS. Let's watch.
Did you submit to the President certain recommendations with respect to the restraints on intelligence collection?
Yes.
And have you got in front of you the document which is at tab A2 of our books?
Yes.
And is that the document which you did submit to the President?
Well, which I submitted to Mr. Haldeman.
You submitted to Mr. Haldeman for transmission to the President.
Yes.
Is that right? Now, in that document, you make certain recommendations with respect to changing restraints which you thought had been placed upon intelligence correction. Is that right?
Yes.
In making those recommendations, did you believe you were representing the consensus of the entire working group that had worked on the study for yourself and for the President?
Yes.
So that whatever recommendations you made with respect to illegal opening of the mail or burglary or surreptitious entry were ones which you believed represented the views of the entire intelligence community, with the exception of the footnotes of Mr. Hoover himself. Is that right?
Yes.
Now, you did recommend, did you not, that the United States should commence, in your view commence, as you understood it commence, or recommence, the illegal opening of mail. Is that correct?
Yes. It was, my understanding from my contacts with the Bureau and through the Working Committee was that in the past that this had been a technique that had been employed, particularly in matters relating to espionage, and that the professional intelligence community indicated that they thought that it was a necessary technique to be undertaken under extreme circumstances, and that they felt that they should be authorized to do so.
And similarly, you also, basing your views on the recommendations of the entire intelligence community, except for Mr. Hoover's footnotes, advocated that the United States should commence or recommence to commit burglaries to acquire valuable intelligence information. Is that right?
Yes. I was told that the Bureau had undertaken black bag jobs for a number of years, up until 1966, that it had been successful and valuable, again, particularly in matters involving espionage, and that they felt this, again, was something that, given the revolutionary climate, they thought they needed to have the authority to do.
And in both cases, your position and their position was, in effect, that the end justifies the means.
No, I'm not going to speak for what their position is, but I don't think that fairly summarizes what my position was.
All right, I'm sure some of the other the other persons here are going to question you on that issue. Did President Nixon, through Mr. Haldeman, approve the recommendations for change which you had made on behalf of the entire intelligence community?
Yes.
What happened after that?
The question then arose as to how the decisions were to be implemented. I had recommended to Mr. Haldeman that I felt that the President ought to call the directors back into his office and inform them personally of his decisions. It seemed to me that that was the proper course to take, particularly in view of the sensitivity of the decisions relative to Mr. Hoover. However, the President and Mr. Haldeman didn't think that that was necessary. So then the question became, how should a decision memorandum go out? Mr. Haldeman seemed to think that it was not necessary for either he or the President to do that, and so I was nominated.
And you sent it out?
Yes, I did, over my signature.
This document represented your proposals to the President for lifting or relaxing certain restraints on the intelligence community with respect to gathering information on what you called the revolutionary climate. I would suppose that had reference to the anti-war demonstrations and the anti-war protest groups.
Senator, I really was peripherally interested in the anti-war demonstrations. What I was concerned about was the 40,000 bombings that took place in 1 year. What I was concerned about was the 39 police officers who were killed in sniping incidents.
Yes, and everything connected with that.
Well, that's what I mean when I'm
protest.
talking about revolutionary violence as opposed to anti-war demonstrations.
Well, whatever your purpose, the document you sent to the President contained your recommendations for lifting or relaxing certain
Or
restraints.
keeping restraints, as in the case of the military.
And in some cases, keeping
Yes.
restraints. Now, was it your understanding when you submitted that document to the President that his authority was being requested for lifting or relaxing restraints if he chose to accept your recommendation?
Yes.
Now, turning to the question of mail coverage on page 2 of your recommendations, I read, recommendation, restrictions on legal coverage should be removed. And I take it by legal coverage you had reference to the procedure that enables intelligence agencies, law enforcement agencies to look at the envelopes. If the procedure is followed, there is a legal way
Yes.
for doing that.
Yes, sir.
Then you recommended also present restrictions on covert coverage should be relaxed on selected targets of priority, foreign intelligence and internal security interests. Now here, you were referring to opening the mail, were you not?
Yes.
And that was against the law, was it not?
Yes.
So, you were making a very serious recommendation to Mr. Nixon. You were recommending that he authorize mail openings, even though such openings were a violation of the law.
Well, I think what was being recommended was that they be employed in spite of the fact that there was a federal law that prohibited. But as in in relationship both to mail and to surreptitious entry, there was, and of course electronic surveillance, there was the whole question as to whether in essence the Fourth Amendment applied to the President in the exercise of his internal security power. And I think that's why I earlier said that when you asked me about our thinking. I think this is where the question arose. In my mind, what we were talking about is something that I'd been told had been done for 25 years. It had been done with the knowledge of the professional intelligence community, the people who had been here long before we got in town and be here long after we left town. The question really was the question of whether inherent in the executive power in matters involving internal security or the security of the state, the President could act contrary to the dictates of a statute. And I think that was the kind of dilemma that we got ourselves in.
You were recommending that the President in this case authorize mail openings even though such action was contrary to the federal statute.
Yes, sir.
Yes. And you have suggested that there might be some inherent right that circumvents the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution of the United States, guaranteeing citizens against unreasonable searches and seizures without a warrant, bearing upon the national security responsibilities of the President.
Senator, I think this really goes to the heart of the matter, as you well know, and I think if you recall in the Safe Streets Act, there was a proviso clause in there that said to the effect that nothing in this act is to be deemed to limit the power of whatever power the President may have with respect to national security matters. I think it was that kind of approach to this whole area of Fourth Amendment rights as they involve in terms of national security, internal security, that opened the door to men who in good conscience thought they could go ahead and do it.
Now, you yourself have suggested this was a very serious question.
Yes, sir.
And you were asking the President to take action that violated a federal statute upon the theory that he had some inherent right to do this. Now, since that is such a central question, since it does go to the protection offered American citizens by the Fourth Amendment of the Constitution, did you take the matter up with the Attorney General of the United States to secure his opinion?
No.
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 When you testified earlier in executive session, you were asked the following question. You were not aware of the fact, I take it, that at this time, the time you were submitting your recommendations to the President, the CIA was opening a mail. Mr. Huston, you replied, no. In fact, I think one of the more interesting things in this whole thing is why I didn't know half the things I didn't know when the President of the United States sat across the table from the directors of the intelligence agencies and said, I want a complete report on what's going on. I didn't know about the CIA mail openings. I didn't know about the COINTEL program. These people were conducting all of these things on their own that the President of the United States didn't know about. Do you still stand by that testimony?
With the exception that I assume, I guess I can't be positive the President didn't know if he learned from other sources, but I can say that I certainly didn't know about it, and it was my responsibility to see that the President knew what was going on.
And to your knowledge, he did not?
No, to my knowledge, he did not know.
And it would have been a very curious exercise for him, wouldn't it, to look at your recommendations asking for his authority to open the mail if he already knew that the practice had been going on for a long time before his authority was asked.
Yes.
Yes. And he never raised that with you?
No.
And 5 days later, upon reconsideration, when he pulled back this report or this directive, did he do that for the purpose of revoking the authority that he had given?
Yes, because Mr. Hoover and Attorney General Mitchell had prevailed upon him to change his decision, which he did, and there was certainly no doubt in my mind, nor do I think could there have conceivably been any doubt in the mind of any of the other people who had been involved that the revocation of the recall of the decision memorandum meant a reversal of the President's position.
So the President revoked the authority he had given?
Yes.
For such things as mail openings?
Yes.
And yet are you aware that the mail openings continued for a long time after that revocation?
Well, I've read the Rockefeller Commission report, yes, sir. Senator, of course, is that I kind of sat down here and created out of whole cloth a entire array of new techniques to exploit and infringe upon the civil liberties of the American people, and that I forced it down Dick Helm's throat, and I blackjacked Admiral Guyler, and I really used my heavy weight on all these poor little professional intelligence people and forced them into coming up with all this. Now, I think the fact of the matter is that the entire intelligence community in the summer of 1970 thought we had a serious crisis in this country. I thought we had a serious crisis in this country. My attitude was that we've got to do something about it. Who knows what to do about it? The professional intelligence community. The professional intelligence community tells me this is what, you give us these tools, we can solve the problem. I recommended those tools. The thing that's interesting to me about the fact that I didn't know about the mail openings, I didn't know about the COINTEL program, is that if we had known that many of these tools that they were asking for permission to use were already being used, and we still weren't getting any results, it conceivably would have changed our entire attitude toward the confidence we were willing to place in the hands of the intelligence community in dealing with this problem. So since I've been out front, as you know, Senator, since the first time we talked back in May in the Armed Services Committee, I mean, I've been out front on this thing. The Huston Plan, I never wrote this report. mean, that everyone calls the Huston Plan. I didn't write that report, but all I want to say, the record is, I thought we had a serious problem. I wasn't concerned about people who didn't like the war. I wasn't concerned about people who thought Nixon was a louse. I wasn't concerned about who was going to be the Democratic nominee. We were talking about bombers, we were talking about assassins, we were talking about snipers, and I felt something had to be done. These people said, here's the tools we need. I take full responsibility. I recommended it.
So what you're saying is really then that the inspiration for the report, in most of its aspects, in the absence of anything but the scantiest of guidelines by the White House, actually came from the agencies involved.
Yes, Senator, for example, I never heard of NISID 6. In fact, never saw NISID 6. For all I know, NISID 6 says you can have free lunch in the White House mess. And yet, you know, it's in here as a recommendation.
What was your attitude toward the President's decision or the reversal of his decision that resulted in the rejection of the plan?
Well, I thought it was a mistake for several reasons. The first reason I thought it was a mistake is that it put us back to ground zero, which was not merely back to ground zero in terms of operational techniques, but back to ground zero in terms of lack of any coordination among the intelligence agencies. Secondly, I felt in my own mind that Mr. Hoover's objections were not based on, well, I want to rephrase it. I thought that not all of Mr. Hoover's objections had been meritoriously submitted to the President as to what he was really concerned about. And thirdly, frankly, I was concerned about what effect this would have on the intelligence community other than the FBI if they could put their back into this project, which was supposed to have been a joint effort. They all reached a consensus, and then one person, the director of the FBI, could succeed in reversing it.
So while you did not prepare this plan, you were, in fact, its advocate.
Yes, sir.
What legal justification or other justification do you have as an attorney and an officer of the court and as a public officer sworn to uphold the Constitution and the laws of the land to entertain and recommend illegal acts by the government?
Well, as I said, Senator, it was my opinion at the time that simply the Fourth Amendment didn't apply to the President in the exercise of matters relating to the internal security or national security. It was an argument that Mr. Justice Douglas, for example, anticipated in the United States District Court case that ruled unconstitutional the domestic wiretaps, because up until 1972, every president, and with the possible exception of Attorney General Clark, every Attorney General argued that the President had inherent authority under and as an executive power to engage in warrantless wiretaps. Although the court in criminal matters had clearly held that a warrantless wiretap violated the Fourth Amendment. Yet the Justice Department even took the case to the Supreme Court because they felt that there was that inherent power. And you and I both know as lawyers that if there's an exception to the Fourth Amendment for electronic surveillance, which is a trespass in common law, then it doesn't take a lot of imagination to extend that from the trespass via the telephone to trespass via surreptitious entry or mail opening. And that's, frankly, the kind of dangerous road that we were hustling down at this point.
All right. If that's your justification, why did you call it illegal then? What you're arguing is that it is legal for the President to violate rights, constitutional and legal rights of citizens if he's the President and if he invokes national security as a justification. But you didn't say that in your memo. You said these things are illegal. Now, which is it?
Well, I think that for the purposes that seemed to me to be most relevant at the time, that is that the operative action, the operation is going to be undertaken by an individual who, if he's caught, is going to go to jail. Is clearly illegal.
Yeah, and so that it would be fair to say that you understood and told the President it was illegal, but to justify it now, you invoke a national security defense, which would make it legal.
No, I'm not.
Now, which position is it?
Senator, I'm not invoking any defense now because you asked me what my opinion was at the time, not what my opinion is now.
All right.
But what I'm saying to you is that the consideration that was given by not only me, but by the other people who signed this report to discuss these things, was that, frankly, it was within the power of the President to do it.
All right, why didn't you say that in your memo, that this would appear to be illegal, but in fact it's legal because as President, you have powers not mentioned in the Constitution, but powers which in our judgment we feel every President possesses, which are such that the law doesn't apply to you, and the constitutional rights of the citizens don't apply where the President decides that the national security dictates a course. Why didn't you say that? Instead of that, you said it was illegal.
I said that because that's what the report had said.
All right. Now, you recall at the time you were discussing these various options to be recommended to the President, what the position was of the principals representing the various agencies. You had a representative from the NSA, one from the CIA, one from the DIA, and one from the FBI. Which of them objected during the course of making up these options to these recommendations which involved illegal acts?
At the working group level, I don't recall any objection.
Do you recall any of them ever saying, we can't do this because it's illegal?
No.
Can you recall any discussion whatsoever concerning the illegality of these recommendations?
No.
Does that strike you as peculiar that top public officers in the most high-level and sensitive positions of government would discuss recommending to the President actions which are clearly illegal and possibly unconstitutional without ever asking themselves whether that was a proper thing for them to be doing?
Yes, I think it is, except for the fact that I think for many of those people, you were talking about something that they have been aware of and been undertaken for a long period of time.
Well, is that an adequate justification?
No, Senator, I'm not trying to justify. I'm just trying to tell you what my impression is of what happened at the time.
Because if criminals could be excused on the grounds that someone had done it before, there wouldn't be much population in any of the prisons today, would there?
No.
What other things were being done, as you later discovered, by the intelligence community that may or may not have been recommended in your report that dealt with similar matters?
I think there were several things that were critically important that we should have known about that we didn't and could have very easily influenced our judgment. One, of course, was the COINTEL program, which we didn't know about. Operation Chaos, or whatever it was, that the CIA had its own private operation going that we didn't know about.
Can you tell us, or is there any reason why the witness should not tell us what COINTEL and Chaos were, the nature of the program?
No, there's no reason. The Justice Department has now made disclosures on COINTEL, and I think the Rockefeller report set out Operation Chaos.
Briefly for this record, Mr. Huston, what were COINTEL and what were Chaos?
As I understand, the COINTEL program was essentially designed to sow discord and was I don't know what the correct technical term for it is, but it was an offensive program against designated targets by the FBI in terms of...
Give us an example.
Well, for example, that Professor Jones is a member of the Socialist Workers' Party and he's running for the school board, and so friendly neighborhood FBI agent sends a letter to the newspaper saying, you may not know this, but this bird that's running for the school board is a member of the Socialist Workers' Party.
All right, the COINTEL program you did not know about at the time of the filing of the Huston report.
No.
And you later learned of it?
Yes.
How did you later learn of it?
Well, when the Justice Department released the report.
Do you know whether or not the President of the United States knew of the COINTEL program?
I don't believe so. All the information that's been made public indicates that no one outside the Bureau was to know about it, including anyone in the Justice Department.
Including the Attorney General and the President?
Including the Attorney General.
What was the other operation?
Well, the Operation Chaos, and that is that apparently the CIA had a group set up that was concerned directly with matters affecting domestic intelligence collection or events that were occurring within the continental United States. We didn't know about that. In fact, the impression that we had all along was that the CIA had very little interest in or coverage of areas which we thought were important, which was what happened abroad when these people who were under surveillance by the FBI left the country. That's where we thought the CIA effort should be.
All right. I'm told I have only 1 minute left, Mr. Huston. Let me ask you this. Do you have any information, can you tell me quickly, who authorized either COINTEL or Chaos? Was it a presidential authorization?
I don't think so. I don't think any president knew about it. And I think both of those programs were originated before this administration. I think COINTEL went back into the Johnson administration and Operation Chaos.
I'm not trying to establish blame, even responsibility. I'm just trying to establish in my own mind's eye whether in these projects the agencies were self-starters or whether someone up the scale may have authorized it.
I don't know, except that they were originated in a prior administration, and my understanding is that President Johnson didn't know about it, and I don't believe President Nixon knew about it.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Goldwater.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a watch in front of me, and I will confine myself to 10 minutes. Some of the interrogations have run 15, but I don't have more than 10 minutes worth. I want to speak first about the Internal Revenue Service, and I'm very happy that the chairman has mentioned this subject. Somebody on this committee has likened the CIA to a bull elephant running rampant. I liken the IRS to a rattlesnake sliding along in the grass, probably the greatest threat to American freedom and Americans of anything we have. And yet this morning is the first public indication I've heard that the Internal Revenue Service is going to be investigated, and I think it's time. I notice a report or letter written by you on September 21st in which you said nearly 18 months ago the President indicated a desire for IRS to move against leftist organizations taking advantage of tax shelters. I have been pressing IRS since that time to no avail. In other words, the IRS will protect any organization in this country they feel like protecting and close down on any organization that they feel like protecting. And I think it's high time that this committee or some other committee expose just what we're up against in this country, because the power to tax is the power to destroy. Now, Mr. Huston, have you ever been a member of the CIA?
No, sir.
FBI?
No, sir.
DIA?
Yes, I was assigned to the DIA when I was an Army intelligence officer.
Were you hired by the White House as a speechwriter at one time?
Yes, sir.
And it was from that you went into the preparation of the so-called Huston Plan?
Yes, sir.
Was the Huston Plan ever used?
No, sir.
Never put into effect?
No.
What do you think about the Huston Plan as you sit here today?
Well, Senator, I think that I still believe that there is a threat that may be characterized and defined as an internal security threat. I think there are people that want to destroy this country. I think there are people that are willing to go to great lengths to do it. I think the 2 attempts upon the life of the president are symptomatic of that. And so I think there's a great necessary place in our society for an effective domestic intelligence collection effort, and more importantly than collection, for professional analysis of that information. I think that it's perhaps easy to justify the emphasis that we attached in 1970, but I think it's just as easy to discount it. We were sitting in the White House getting reports day in and day out of what was happening in this country in terms of the violence, the numbers of bombings, the assassination attempts, the sniping incidents, 40,000 bombings, for example, in a period. ROTC facilities, in the month of May, in a 2-week period, we were averaging 6 arsons a day against ROTC facilities. What happened then, I think, is, at least from my perspective, is that we were convinced ourselves that this was something that was going to just continue to get worse until we reached the point where all the people who were predicting police-state repression were going to get it was going to become a self-fulfilling prophecy, because that was the only way it was going to be handled. as, for example, I suspected had been true in the Chicago Black Panther raid and in the Los Angeles Black Panther shootout. So my view was that we had to do something to stop it. Mr. White would say that this authorized the extension into every person's mailbox. Theoretically that may be true, although I don't think that the terms that we used in terms of highly selective targets or top priority target was a bit looser than the terms that Attorney General Clark used when he got authorization from President Roosevelt and when President Truman authorized electronic surveillance. But the fact of the matter is that we were motivated, unjustly perhaps, or unreasonably, or unconscionably, by a legitimate concern that was related to the lives and the property of people that were subject to random acts of violence. My view was that I had confidence in the professional intelligence community. These were the professionals. These are the people who had been authorized to solve these problems. What I didn't realize then is that these kinds of programs, although theoretically and conceptually can be narrowly used in the best interest of the country by responsible people, can lead to the type of thing that happened with the plumbers and with the Watergate. Now everyone tries to link the Huston Plan as the precursor of the plumbers and the Watergate, and in my mind that's totally untrue. But it's obvious to me that this kind of thing lends itself too easily to the type of corruption that we've seen. And therefore I've come to the conclusion that whereas I would traditionally have taken the position that I'm willing to run some small risk of infringing upon some small portion of the public's otherwise legitimate rights for the greater good of the security of all the people, I now have come to the conclusion that we have no practical alternative but to take a far greater risk, that there are going to be these kinds of things that we can't deal effectively against until such time as perhaps our recourse is simply to the ongoing criminal process. But I don't want to leave the impression that I think that there's no problem, because I think that we need to deal with this thing in such a way as to maximize the respect for the rights of the citizens, at the same time not destroying the capability of the people acting through their government to protect themselves against those who would destroy this country.
Well, I thank you, Mr. Huston, for that statement. I agree with that statement 100%. I have no other questions. I'll just comment that as long as we have Daniel Ellsberg's, some newspapers, journalists, media people, organizations intent on changing the basic philosophy of this country by the same kind of subversion that you are now being at least charged with part way, I think we have to be forever on our toes. And I think you've expressed your purpose well. Every time I pick up a morning paper or an evening paper and I see the disclosure of secrets that I thought were locked up in my brain or my heart or my safe, I get worried about my country. And I hope that this committee, through the continued diligence of its chairman and staff members, will disclose everything wrong with this country. That's all I have.
Thank you, Senator Goldwater. You've indicated that after the fact you found out that many of the agencies that were on that interagency task force were using tools that they were sitting there discussing White House approval for obtaining. Why do you think they were going through this charade?
I wish I knew. I don't know. I think part of the problem was that if the other agencies knew they were doing it, there would have been all sorts of problems. Because, for example, the FBI greatly resented President Johnson ordering the military intelligence into the domestic collection area in 1967 because that was their charter. But the President directly ordered it, and they had to live with it, although they certainly were anxious and happy that the Ervin Committee hearings blew that out of the water and got those people out of the business. I think, for example, the FBI and Mr. Hoover would have had an absolute stroke if he'd have known that the CIA had an Operation Chaos going on. So I think that the last thing in the world the CIA would have done was to disclose to the Bureau that they were working on their turf. I think interagency jealousies and rivalries had part to do with it. I think the second thing is that if you've got a program going and you're perfectly happy with its results, why take the risk that it might be turned off if the President of the United States decides he doesn't want you to do it, because they had no way of knowing in advance what decision the President might make. So why should the CIA run the risk that the President may say, hell no, I don't want you guys opening any mail? Then if they'd admitted it, they'd have had to close the thing down. The COINTEL program, apparently even the Justice Department didn't know about that. If they'd have told me, it was obvious that that the word would have been out. So it seems to me that many of these agencies just kind of operated in their own world and had their own programs going. They didn't want anyone else to know it, and the thing that intrigues me is that I always was under the illusion that the purpose of intelligence was to provide policymakers with information upon which to make policies. But if the policymaker doesn't even know that those sources of information are available, I don't know what in the world good it does anybody, except the people who are operating it for their own gratification.
This really brings us back to Senator Mondale's question: how can a president feel that the law is being obeyed and that the presidential policy is being adhered to? And doesn't that bring us then full circle back to the Constitution and to the assurance, the extent that we can be sure of any human undertaking, that the Constitution is understood and that loyalty to the Constitution is being given by every public servant?
Yes, I think it comes back to an assumption by all officers of what an agreement among all people in government is exactly what the limits and responsibilities and obligations imposed by the Constitution are. But I think that the problem that we've had, and it's not just in this area, Senator, I think it's in many areas, that over the past 30 years you've had an accretion of little steps of increased claim of executive power. And pretty soon, after a 30-year period, all of a sudden you woke up one morning and here was this creature that had been created that no one along the line had ever really contemplated. Each of these steps, I think, initially were innocent, honest steps. I mean, I think most of these, in my belief, that these people in the intelligence community were honest people, dedicated people, wanting to do an honest job for what they thought was best for the country. And I don't think that they were out to destroy the liberties of the American people for any perverse political purpose. But what happened, in my judgment, in this area, where I got sucked in, when I should have known better, and where many other more intelligent, sophisticated people got sucked in other areas, is the whole concept of some inherent executive power that really extends beyond anything contemplated by those who made the incremental claims as we went through the years. And I think that position has been reached, and now there's some hard looks at this and some knocks, and perhaps we're even, my judgment, a little bit too much the other way. But I think that's healthy, and I think that we're on the right track.